Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 177 of the Medieval Podcast. I'm Danielle Sobalski, also known as the 5-Minute Medievalist. Well, the leaves have all fallen in this hemisphere at least, and we are rounding the corner into holiday season. Whether you have faith or you don't have faith, it's a time when people are getting together and they're exchanging gifts. So what I wanted to do this week, kind of a short episode. We've had some long episodes lately, and this one is just a short one to help you find the right gift for the medievalist or the medieval interested in your life, whether that's you or someone else. Now, I'm not a super materialistic person. If you've read my monk book, you know I'm a minimalist, so I'm not big into stuff, but I am big into generosity, so this still works for me. And I know that when it comes to things like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and Giving Tuesday, this is a time when people are counting their pennies and they're finding ways to give gifts to the people they love in a way that actually fits within their budget. So I thought, I'm always trying to think of ways to be helpful to you. So I thought this might be a good way for me to share some ideas for ways that you can be generous to the people that you love, maybe even yourself. Self-love is important. And to perhaps be generous in other ways as this holiday season comes around. So we're going to be talking about gifts. My first 5-minute medievalist guide to gifts for the holidays will be coming up right after this. So to start off this gift guide, we have to say that one of the best gifts you can give to anyone is, of course, a book, right? I think this is the right audience to say this to because I think you are a book-loving people. This is why you're here. And I will tell you that all of the books that I have featured on the podcast are ones that I have personally read. I don't feature a book on the podcast unless I've read it myself. And this is a promise that I make to you. It's something that I think is part of the integrity that I have behind the podcast. So if it's been on here, I've read it. And it's given you, hopefully, a flavor of these books. So you can go back over the episodes and see what speaks to you. For the people who are just getting into medieval studies, I think that you can still not go wrong with a book by some of the major heavy hitters in our field. So a Dan Jones book, a Helen Castor book, Seb Falk's book is really good too. These books are for people who are just getting their feet wet in the field. And what I love about them is they're very energizing. They're very empathetic. You can get into the characters. You can get into what's going on over the course of history. And I mean, I say characters, but of course, these are real people. And Dan Jones does a great job of doing kind of sweeping epics. They tell you all of the major points that people talk about when they talk about history, right? I'm thinking of Power and Thrones right now, where he hits all the major points in medieval history that people discuss. So this is a good one to start people out. Helen Castor, She-Wolves, I think it's getting to be an older book, but it's still such a great one to introduce people to the queens of the Middle Ages. Helen is just a very sensitive writer in that she really gets into the heads of the people that she studies. So I really think that these are two great ways to get into it. If you want to give people a primary source to read that's going to be compelling, somebody's right at the beginning of their medieval journey, I mean, I always love J.R.R. Tolkien's adaptation. I was going to say translation. I think translation is probably correct from Middle English of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is still pretty easy to find on the internet. You can order it from many bookstores, but I think it's just such a beautiful poem and the language is so beautiful and the story is so beautiful. I think that will really speak to people as they're getting into the Middle Ages to begin with. And of course, there are always a million different versions of Malory's Morte d'Arthur, so you can find that anywhere. Stories of King Arthur, you cannot go wrong with those for people who are just getting into the Middle Ages and you're looking for a gift for them and you're not sure what they're into yet. King Arthur stories, I mean, you can't go wrong with those. So I would really recommend those. As for scholarly books, you're trying to find a book for a scholar in your life and you're not sure what to get for them. And it should be something that you can find fairly easily. I would say of the books that I've talked about this year, two of the ones that I think are going to be really helpful and essential for scholars are Household Goods and Good Households by Catherine French and Poisoned Wells by Safir Barzilai. I spoke to Safir later in the year, so closer to now. I think it was in the summertime. And I spoke to Catherine in the spring. Both of these books I think are going to be really important for scholars going forward. And they're written in a way that is very accessible too. So if you have somebody who is interested in the Middle Ages and they're ready for something that's kind of more in depth, I really think these ones are good. If you're on a budget, and I totally get this because I'm always on a budget as well, what are some good options? If we're going to stick with scholars for a minute, Arc Humanities Press has a whole series called Past Imperfect, and they are these little tiny books at a better price point than many academic books, and they are so good. They're written by some of the best people in the field, and they're on all sorts of subjects, and they're a real entry point into all sorts of subjects. So I had Anthony Caldelis on the podcast a couple of years ago talking about Byzantium, for example. He's one of the people that has written for the Past Imperfect series. So if you're trying to find a gift for a scholar, Past Imperfect is amazing. There's going to be something that they're interested in that series. And you'll probably have to go to Arc Humanities' website. I'm going to have all the websites for you, of course, on the post that comes out with this on Medievalist.net. So look into Past Imperfect and see if there's anything that speaks to the scholar on your list. If you are on a seriously tight budget, and again, no shame, many of us are in this boat a lot of the time, I would really encourage you to go to a used bookstore. And I mean, this might sound obvious, but I'm going to give you a secret tip on this. So when you go to a used bookstore, more often than not, they do have a section on medieval history. You want to get something that is more recent than not. Some of the stuff that was written about 50 years ago, it is out of date. So if you can find something that is more recent, have a look at those and see if there's something that speaks to the person on your list. But here's the secret. Almost every used bookstore has a section of just penguin classics. So those are those little black books with a tiny penguin on the spine and usually a bar of red or yellow at the top. And most of these penguin books, the penguin classics, are translations of primary sources. So if you remember, primary sources are those sources that come from history themselves. So they are translations of things that came out of the Middle Ages. I have on my shelf a whole bunch of penguin classics. I have the Chronicles of Froissart, which talks about the 14th century. I have the Travels of Marco Polo. I have John de Mandeville. I have the Alexiad. I have all of these books on my shelf that were super cheap penguin paperbacks that came from a used bookstore. So if you are on a super tight budget, that is cool. Go to a used bookstore and check out the Penguin Classics section because you might well find a primary source or two that will really speak to the person on your list who's a historian and that wants to really get deep in touch with the Middle Ages. Many of these Penguin Classics, the translations are just beautiful. So really have a look at those. And that is probably my best on a budget tip for the medievalist on your list is Penguin Classics. If you're more into getting household goods that have a medieval flavor, there are lots of options that may not be on the main path. So you may not find them on Amazon, but you can find them at museum gift shops. So these are for people that have a few more pennies in the budget usually. But the good news is if you get something from a museum gift shop, it means you're supporting that museum. And who does not want to do that, right? So it's win-win getting something for your loved one, supporting the museum. So all sorts of museums and even archives have gift shops. So there are the National Archives in the States has one. The British Museum has a gift shop, of course, a fantastic one. The Royal Ontario Museum here in Toronto has one. There are all sorts of different museums that have gift shops with online stores. Now, I know this because many of them have little sections that are just monks. So you can sometimes look for monks. And that is a great place to find medieval stuff at a museum gift shop. The Met Cloisters, I shouldn't forget, is a really good one as well because that is specifically a medieval museum. So have a look at those and see if there's something that speaks to your person, your loved one at those museum gift shops. You can usually find mugs. I mean, who doesn't love a hot beverage while they're poring over medieval texts? Or socks or even aprons and tea towels. Those are really great options. Now, I do know that if you are interested in helping a medievalist directly that has an online shop, Our friend John Wyatt Greenlee, who does eel history, sells products that are medieval eel based. So I'll have the link for you to his shop as well, so you can go and get medieval eel stuff if you like. As for me, I looked into getting stickers for you to have autographed copies of my books, and there's no way for me to get these stickers to you before Christmas. So I'm going to still look into offering these stickers for you so that your books can be autographed by me by putting a sticker book plate in them. But that's going to be after Christmas, unfortunately. And speaking, of course, of supporting Medievalists directly, there are always different ways to do that. Find your content creators that you like, whether it's my podcast on Patreon. Thank you, everybody, for supporting my Patreon through medievalist.net. It's really theirs, but they do pay for my work out of it, so thank you for that. Patreon.com/medievalists is the one-stop shop for supporting this podcast, the Military Podcast with Kelly DeVries and Michael Livingston, and the Scottish Chronicon podcast, as well as Lucy Lemonier's podcast. So all of those, it's a one-stop shop. You can support all of these podcasts through patreon.com/medievalists. But there are other content creators out there, of course. Find their Patreons. Many of these people, a lot of Tudor historians, have shops attached to their podcasts, so you can go and check those things out. Often you can find really quirky gifts through there, through Etsy as well. Look for medieval stuff through Etsy. That's very good too. There are lots of weapons makers. Just have a look around and see if you can get something from a maker in order to support a small business or a solopreneur like me through gift giving. To continue on along that vein somewhat, one of the things you can give that is both really useful to the receiver and very useful to the content creator is subscriptions. So there are magazines that you can subscribe to. Of course, the ones that you can get through Patreon for Medievalist.net anyway, are the Medieval Magazine, which is a digital magazine created by Sandra Alvarez, who was one of the founding partners of Medievalists.net. That's her solo venture right now, so you can support that Medieval Magazine and get all sorts of really great articles coming to the people that you love. Medieval Warfare morphed into Medieval World magazine, so you can get those subscriptions either independently or through the Patreon here, and that will give people all sorts of great medieval stuff that comes in the mail. And I don't know about you, but I think every time you get something in the mail, it's like Christmas itself. So I really think that these subscriptions are great. BBC History Extra magazine is always excellent. It's always beautiful. It's always got really great articles in it. They're not paying me to promote it, but I really do think it's a great magazine. That's another one that you can get a subscription for people, especially if you're in North America, where sometimes that magazine can be hard to find. If you get a subscription for someone, they will be getting that all the time, and that is a really helpful thing. Another subscription that you can get for someone is to History Hit. So in case you haven't discovered History Hit yet, History Hit is like a hub of content of history of all sorts. And so there's a lot of stuff there. If you have a history buff that's into World War II, for example, they will love History Hit. So it's kind of like Netflix at its core, where you have a subscription and most of the content is video. But of course, over time, they've started to add podcasts as well. There's a medieval-themed podcast. There are Tudor-themed podcasts. There are all sorts of podcasts available through History Hit too. And that's all one subscription. So you can do that too. My friend Eleanor Yanniga's there, Dan Jones is there, Dan Snow is there. There's all sorts of great content that's coming through History Hit. So if you're on a budget, again, this is something where you can give a present that overall is worth a lot. But for you, it's only a little bit at a time, which makes it much more manageable. And of course, the content is really great, and it's something someone can access all year. I mean, it's the best of all worlds. Another thing that you can get for somebody who is more academic or more into the Middle Ages in a serious way is membership in a professional association. So when I had Lisa Fagan Davis on the podcast not too long ago, she mentioned that Medieval Academy of America is not just for academics, but it tends to be for people who are pretty serious about the subject. And you can get a membership to Medieval Academy of America for a gift for someone. This will allow them to get Speculum, which is the journal for that society. It will allow them to access events and it will get them on the mailing list, which is really important, telling people about other events that are going on that are medieval themed. There are other places, of course, you can get memberships. The Canadian Society of Medievalists is one. And these are things that if you have a medievalist loved one in your life, maybe they are not getting for themselves because perhaps this membership seems pretty steep for them. So you can take that off their plate. You can give them something that is very useful to them professionally, and that makes life easier for them. So memberships are a really good opportunity for them too. And of course, you can get memberships to places like museums, right? So you could get a membership to the British Museum, for example, or the Royal Ontario Museum, or the National Archives. You can get memberships to allow these people in your life who are scholars that really want to do more of this stuff to access the things that they need to be able to see those things in real life. Met Cloisters. I shouldn't forget Met Cloisters. It's been so important to my work, the Met Cloisters, in terms of its artifacts and how they are so generous with their pictures. I never want to forget the Met Cloisters. If you're on a budget, you can get someone a single day pass to one of these places and it'll still be worth so much as a research trip or just a fun trip for them. This is something that will be really appreciated, and it's not all that far outside of a budget. Lastly, because the holiday season is not just about giving to the people that you love, but giving to people who need help, giving to society at large. Of course, I'm really going to encourage you to be as generous as you can be. It's a very medieval trait, generosity, and giving around the holidays is something that we can see that is continuing from the Middle Ages to today, and of course, further back into antiquity. So if you have extra medieval books, give those to charity. There might be someone who will pick them up. If you have extra food, give it to a food bank. If you have extra mittens, give it to a mitten drive. All of these things are really, really important. And we also know from scientific research, something that you might find in my monk book as well, that giving to other people, being in service of other people makes you feel good. So it is win-win all around. In terms of medieval specific stuff, there are some ways that you can donate that are very, very helpful. One way is to donate to scholarship funds. I would say look at a local medieval association, whether that's Medieval Academy, Canadian Society of Medievalists, or whatever is around in your region, and see if there are scholarship funds that you can donate to. There are many scholarships that are given to allow scholars to travel so that they can give their papers or do their research. Many of these are scholarships that are aimed at people who are in underserved communities, perhaps, or minorities. So look around and see if there are scholarship opportunities that you can donate to. This is really important stuff. They'll never know that it was you that gave this money to them, but you are allowing them to pursue a career that's very important to them. Of course, you can always donate to the places that are around you that may need help, whether that's museums or archives or castles if you live in Europe. We've seen in the news recently that there are some closures happening at castles and museums. So if you are close by to somewhere and you're not just getting stuff from the gift shop, that's helpful as well. You can actually make donations to help with the upkeep to allow for people to keep visiting these sites. So important to walk in the same footsteps of the people who lived during the Middle Ages. So those donations are really important. Or you can volunteer your time to help guide people through a church, for example. You have to get trained up to do it, but it's important. Volunteering is also really helpful. But all of those churches, ruins, castles, museums, and archives can always use donations. So when we get to Giving Tuesday, for example, or beyond, and always, this is a good place to put your dollars if you have them. Or pounds, or euros, or found coins from the Thames foreshore. So as we wrap up, just a quick recap. Books are some of the best gifts you can give to people who are interested in the Middle Ages. The newest, most expensive ones are always, always welcome, but do look around for cheaper alternatives like the Past Imperfect series for your academic friends, or for people who are just getting into the Middle Ages and they want a taste of a specific subject. do dig around in used bookshops. Look for those Penguin classics. Those are really going to be a lifesaver in a lot of ways, or a stocking stuffer for people who have a bigger budget and they want to make sure that the medievalist in their life has a primary source that they can look at. Subscriptions like to magazines or to History Hit will keep giving history all year. Always a really great option. Subscriptions often also will help content creators individually, so you can look for ways to do that too. You can find quirky gifts at museum gift shops or on Etsy or places like John Wyatt Greenlee's store. So look around for places like that too. Professional memberships are a gift that I don't think everyone thinks about, but really, really helpful to the professional in your life who is pursuing medieval studies. And donations to museums, to archives, to Patreons, to scholarships. All of these things are going to give back and keep the tide of history moving and keep it flowing and allow more people to access more history. And since we're talking about generosity and nice things to do for other people, I really want to thank everyone who is a patron on patreon.com. And I really want to thank everybody who has started letting the ads play through. I can actually see a big difference in the impressions of the ads. So thanks for everybody who listened through and took that advice to heart. Thank you so much for listening through the ads, because that does make a difference and allow me to make a living at this. So thank you so much to everybody. I hope that this has been a helpful episode. I mean, it is really kind of off the beaten track for me, but I know that when we come into such a busy season, our minds get overwhelmed and full of things. So I hope this is a helpful episode to you in some ways and reminds you of all the different ways, not only that we can be generous to each other and really share the gift of history, but also, I think, a reminder of all the different ways that we can access history in our lives and bring more of it into our lives and into the lives of those people that we love that are super history geeks just like you and just like me. Before we go, here's Peter from Medievalists.net to tell us what's on the website. What's going on, Peter?
Hey. Well, we started a new series on Medievalists, True Crusader Crime.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's by Steve Tibble. He's now a fairly well-known Crusader historian. He's done a really good job looking at rather obscure events that took place in the Crusader world. So a couple of them are on the site. One's like this murder of a bishop, and the other is the case of the mysterious Lord S.
Lord S?
Yes. So read on. Read on, my faithful followers.
All right. What else have you got for them?
Yeah, we got a look at Viking axes, the stirrup thesis, and was feudalism wasteful from an economics perspective? So I thought that was a really interesting piece, just looking at the economics of feudalism and what they did with all that surplus income.
Well, if it's wasteful, do they have surplus income? I guess we're going to have to find out.
Oh, yeah. Read the end. Yeah, there actually was quite a lot. I guess instead of building things, they partied and held tournaments.
Well, who's not in favor of that?
So we got all that and more on the site this week.
All right. Well, thanks, Peter, for stopping by.
Thanks.
For everything from gifts to shifts, follow Medievalists.net on Facebook or Twitter at Medievalists. You can find me, Danielle Sobolski, on social media at 5MIN Medievalist or 5-Minute Medievalist. And you can find my books, which make excellent gifts, at all your favorite bookstores, where you can get hold of How to Live Like a Monk, Medieval Wisdom for Modern Life in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. Our music is Beyond the Warriors by Guy Frog. Thanks for listening, and have yourself an amazing day.